The morning I found that switchback already cut, I was alone on the ridge except for Pepper, and my first thought was that someone had made a mistake on the map. My second thought was that I had made the mistake. I stood at the upper end of the turn, still breathing hard from the climb, and looked at the cut grade running clean through the alder brush for 30 feet or so. The soil broken and bermed exactly the way I would have done it myself, and I could not account for it. The crew was a full day behind me. Walt had not mentioned sending anyone ahead. The work was precise, the kind of precise that comes from knowing what you are doing and taking the time to do it right, and there were no tools left behind, no candy wrappers, no boot prints in the soft duff that I could read as belonging to anyone I knew. Pepper walked the length of the cut grade and came back to me and sat down. She was not alarmed. I want you to understand that because it matters to what came next. She was not alarmed at all. To explain what that morning meant, I need to go back about 6 weeks. I had been a lineman for most of my working life, 28 years of it, climbing towers and poles in weather that had no interest in my comfort. I retired at 53. That was not the plan. The plan was to work until 58, at which point Deb and I had agreed we would sell the place in Wallowa County and buy a smaller piece of land somewhere in the Cascades, closer to the kind of trail country she loved. She had it mapped out. She had a binder. There were photographs of ridge views cut from hiking magazines, and she had written notes in the margins in her looping left-handed cursive, labeling things she wanted to show me and things she wanted us to stand in front of together. I am not a man who uses words like binder without some embarrassment, but she was systematic that way, and I came to love the binders the way I came to love everything else about her, which was slowly and permanently. She got sick when she was 51. It took 2 years. I retired early to be home for it, and then she was gone. And I was 53 years old with an early retirement and a binder of photographs I could not bring myself to open, and a house that had developed a quality of largeness I could not fix by leaving lights on. Pepper came from a litter Deb had already arranged before she got the diagnosis. A friend's dog had pups in early spring that year, and Deb had put a deposit down on the black female. And when the time came to pick her up, it was just me making the drive. Pepper was 8 weeks old and weighed about 4 pounds, and slept on my chest on the truck seat the whole way home, which was an hour and 20 minutes, and I did not begrudge her any of it. The trail work started about 6 months after Deb died. I'd seen a flyer at the Ranger District office when I went in to renew my campfire permit, and I took one home more or less to have something to carry. The volunteer trail crew worked out of the district on weekends and sometimes on weekdays when the season allowed, doing brushing and tread work and drainage clearing on sections of trail that the district could not staff. It was physical work that required attention to grade and to the specific behavior of soil and water, and it kept me off the couch for hours at a time, which was the whole point. Walt ran the crew. He was 60-something, lean, had done this kind of work for going on 20 years. He did not talk much about himself, which I appreciated, and he did not ask me much about myself either, which I appreciated more. I worked with the crew through the spring and the summer and into fall. Walt gave me assignments that matched what I could do. I showed up, I worked hard, I went home. It was not a solution to anything. It was a way of spending the hours. Deb had a habit with oranges. This sounds stranger than it is. She grew up in eastern Oregon in a house where fresh fruit in October and November was a real luxury. And somewhere in her childhood she had decided that an orange in cold weather was the finest thing in the world, and that opinion never left her. When we did any kind of hiking, she always brought one. She would peel it at whatever spot she had chosen for her view, eating the sections slowly, and she said the cold air and the smell of the peel together were the combination she was looking for. She said it was like a recipe. I used to tease her about it, gently, the way you tease someone when you find the small rituals they have constructed for themselves genuinely moving and do not know how else to say so. After she died, I started bringing an orange on trail days. I did not plan to. It happened the first time because I found one in the bottom of her day pack when I was pulling gear together, left from a hike we had taken in September, the month before things got serious, and I put it in my own pack without thinking. At the end of that first day of trail work, I set it on the trailhead log at the bottom of the section we had been brushing, and I stood there for a minute, and then I walked back to my truck. I did not make a story of it. It was just what I did. I brought one most weekends after that, and I left it at whatever log or rock marked the day's starting point, and I drove home. I had not talked to my brother Glenn in 14 months. That is its own kind of sorrow, and I will come to it. The short version is that Glenn had opinions about how I handled Deb's illness and the years before it. Opinions I was not ready to hear, and I had said things back to him that I could not unsay. And then we had both gone quiet, and the quiet had become its own structure. 14 months. I am not proud of it. The assignment that came in late September was a 4-mile reroute on a remote ridge section, an old trail that had been running straight up a fall line for decades and needed to be put on proper switchbacks to stop the erosion. Walt briefed me on it at the district office the last week of September. The crew would be 3 of us plus Walt himself, and the plan was for me to go up the day before with Pepper to assess the grade and flag the proposed line for the switchbacks, since I was the one with the most experience reading terrain for drainage. Walt had the maps, he had the proposed route sketched out, and he needed someone to walk it and confirm the grades were workable before we brought the full crew and the tools. I drove up to the trailhead on a Thursday morning in early October. There was frost in the low spots, and the sky was the kind of pale that a cold October morning makes. Not blue yet, just a thin light coming through the timber. I put Pepper on her lead until we cleared the trailhead area, then let her off once we were on the trail proper. She is a good trail dog. She stays close enough that I can see her, and she has sense enough not to push wildlife when she finds it. The trail ran through mixed timber for the first mile or so. Douglas fir and some big Engelmann spruce at the higher elevation. And then it came out onto the drier upper ridge where the alder brush took over in the gaps, and the trail got rougher. The proposed reroute started at about mile 2 and ran for roughly a mile and a half up to the saddle where the old trail and the new line rejoined. I had the flags in my pack, and I was ready to spend most of the day walking the proposed grades and making notes. I found the first switchback turn in good shape, just as the map had it, though the existing ground cover would need clearing. I flagged the cut line and moved on. The second switchback location was a narrower bench, and I could see it would need some handwork to establish a decent platform, but it was manageable. I flagged it and moved on. The third switchback was where I stopped. The turn was already roughed in. Not brushed out, not fully finished, but the first pass at it was done. The soil broken and moved to form a berm on the downhill side, the line of the grade running clean through the alder for a full 30 feet or better. It was not a half-hearted piece of work. Someone had known what grade to run and had run it, had known where the berm needed to go and had put it there, had done it with the kind of attention that comes from caring about the outcome. I walked the whole length of it twice. I measured the grade against my clinometer. It was close to perfect. There were no tools left behind, no Pulaski planted in the berm, no McLeod leaned against a spruce. The soil disturbance at the edges of the cut was not fresh, but it was recent, within the past week, by my read of how the exposed soil had dried and how the disturbed duff had resettled. I looked for boot prints in the soft areas. I found some compressed ground near the uphill edge, but nothing I could read as a specific boot shape. Nothing I could take to Walt and say with certainty, "Here is who did this." Pepper walked the cut grade with her nose down, tail moving at a steady pace, not fast and not alarmed. She came back to me at the uphill end and sat beside my left boot and looked toward the timber. I stood there for a while. I went through the list. Walt could have sent someone up early and not mentioned it. One of the other crew could have come out on their own and gotten started. The district could have sent a seasonal employee I did not know about. Each of those was possible in the way that any explanation is technically possible. None of them fit the way the work was done or the absence of anything left behind. A person who comes up alone to start a volunteer project and gets that far does not leave without their tools. They leave a note, or they flag the end of their work, or they wait. They do not vanish. I made my notes. I flagged the continuing line above the pre-cut turn. I ate my lunch sitting on the berm with Pepper beside me, looking down into the drainage below the ridge. The timber was quiet. The kind of quiet you get on a ridge in October when the weather is holding and the wind is down, which is a particular quality of quiet that anyone who has spent time in that kind of country would recognize. A complete quiet without being an empty one. Birds working somewhere lower on the drainage. A Clark's nutcracker going about its business in the timber above. The ordinary sounds of the ridge going on around me the way they do when a person has been still long enough to stop being a disturbance. I finished flagging the upper section and came back down to the trailhead in the late afternoon. The trailhead log was a big old stump, 3 feet across, the top worn flat by years of hikers sitting on it to lace their boots. I took the orange from my pack and set it on the center of the flat top the way I always did. Pepper sat beside the stump and watched me. I stood there a moment, and then I loaded up and drove back to the campsite where I had left the tent. I have told this story twice before this. Once to my neighbor Carl, who listened carefully and then said he reckoned there were things in those hills that people did not give enough credit. Once to a friend of Deb's named Ruth, who cried, which I was not expecting and which moved me more than I knew how to say. If you are hearing it now, you are the third telling. I want to be clear that I am not a person who believes readily in things he cannot account for. I want to be clear that the only reason I am telling this at all is that I have run out of alternative explanations, and I have decided that matters. The next morning, I drove back to the trailhead before the crew arrived. Walt and the others were not due until mid-morning. I parked and put on my pack and walked Pepper to the stump because I had gotten in the habit of starting each day there. The orange was gone. In its place, centered on the flat top of the stump the way I had centered the orange, was a single smooth stone. It was flat, roughly oval, about the size of my palm. It was the kind of stone you find in stream beds, worn smooth by water over a long time. A pale grey with a faint line of quartz running through it at an angle. It had been set down deliberately. You can tell the difference between something that landed somewhere and something that was placed. I stood at that stump for a long time. I am not able to tell you exactly how long. Pepper was beside me. She did not alarm, did not bark, did not raise her hackles. She sat beside the stump and looked toward the tree line the way she had looked toward the timber the afternoon before, with a quality of attention that I can only describe as patient. The kind of look she gives when she has already identified what she is looking at and is comfortable with it. I picked up the stone. I turned it over. It was clean on both sides. I put it in my breast pocket and zipped the pocket closed. I want you to know that I considered every explanation I could think of. Another hiker, arriving after dark or very early in the morning, who had found the orange strange and removed it and left the stone as a kind of commentary. A joke played by Walt or one of the crew who had driven up the night before and had not said anything. An animal, a raccoon or a pack rat, that had carried the orange away and left the stone as some incidental coincidence of movement. I held each of those for a while. I held each of them seriously. None of them held together when I pressed on them. An animal does not center a stone. A hiker arriving in the dark does not know to replace what they removed with something of equal deliberateness. Walt does not play that kind of game, and I knew the others in the crew well enough to know the same of them. The crew arrived at 9:30. Walt drove up in his district-marked truck, the other two volunteers behind him in a personal rig. We got tools sorted and walked the section I had flagged, and Walt looked at the pre-cut third switchback and looked at me, and I told him I had no explanation for it. He said it had not been on the work list when he last checked, and he spent a few minutes on his radio but got no useful answer. He wrote it in his notes. He is the kind of man who writes things in his notes and does not make more of them than the facts allow. We worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Good hard work, the kind I needed. Tread work on the upper switchbacks, drainage clearing on the lower section, some brushing on a stretch that had narrowed to the point where a person with a full pack had to turn sideways. Pepper stayed near me all day. She wandered within sight, but not beyond, and twice during the afternoon she stopped and looked into the timber downslope from where we were working, and held that same patient quality of attention. The second time she did it, I stopped working and listened. The bird sounds had gone quiet. Not gradually the way they do when weather is building or when you have been making too much noise, but all at once, or near enough to all at once that the difference did not matter. One moment the nutcrackers were working and there was a small woodpecker going at a snag somewhere below, and then there was not. I stood with my MacLeod in my hands and listened to the timber. Nothing. No wind in the canopy, no squirrel traffic, no bird of any kind. My body knew something before my mind finished catching up. I have had that experience a few times in 28 years of working in conditions that would hurt you if you were not paying attention, and I have learned not to argue with it. I did not drop the tool. I did not call out. I just went very still and listened and looked at the timber. Walt and the others were 20 yards upslope from me working around a drainage issue. I could hear their tools and their occasional short exchanges. That ordinary sound continued. What had stopped was the wild sound, everything that was not us. I watched the tree line below the trail for a while. The afternoon light was getting low, coming in at an angle through the spruce and fir, throwing long bars of shadow across the slope. I was looking for movement in the shadows. After a minute or two, maybe 3, I found it. Not a clear shape. A shadow moving differently from the surrounding shadows. Something large and upright in the timber. Slow enough and deliberate enough that it registered more as a presence than as a motion. It was there, and then it was not. The way a shape in deep timber will be visible in one bar of light and invisible in the next. I did not move. Pepper was beside me, and she was not moving either. She was still in the way she gets when she has decided that stillness is the correct response. Not afraid, just fully present. Her tail was down, but not tucked. Her ears were forward. She was watching the same place in the timber that I was watching, and her breathing was steady. The crew worked on up the slope. Walt called down once to ask how the drainage was reading, and I called back that it was manageable, and my voice was level, which I was aware of even as it came out. The light shifted. The long shadows moved. And then the shape in the timber stepped forward, just far enough forward to be fully visible in a gap between 2 large spruce trees. And I saw it clearly. I have been a practical man all my life, and I will be a practical man about this. It was large, 8 feet tall or better, and broad through the shoulders in a way that made the spruce trunks on either side look slender, which they were not. Dark in its colouring, a deep brown that read almost black in the shadow, but caught a quality of amber in the low afternoon light that put me in mind of a bear's fur in late fall when the colour has deepened. It stood upright, with the ease of something that stands upright naturally. No forward lean, no awkwardness. The weight settled through it the way weight settles through a person who has been still for a long time and is not tired. Its hands, and they were hands, were at its sides, and one of them rested briefly against the bark of the spruce to its left, not gripping, just touching. Its face was turned toward me. I cannot be more specific than that, without inventing details I did not have. The light did not give me the kind of clarity I would need to describe its features with the precision I give to everything else in this account. What I can say is that it was looking at me. That much was not a question, and the quality of the attention it directed at me was not aggressive, and was not fearful, and was not, as far as I could tell, anything that belonged in a category I already had. We stayed that way for what felt like a long time. I know from the movement of the light that it was probably a few minutes. Then it turned, slowly, without urgency, without any performance of departure. It moved back into the timber, and the shadows took it, and the timber closed around the space where it had been, and I was looking at undisturbed trees. The birds came back, not all at once, but within 30 seconds the nutcrackers resumed their noise somewhere above me, and a small thing moved in the brush below, and the ordinary sounds of the ridge returned the way water returns to a channel after a brief damming. I looked down at Pepper. She looked up at me. She had not moved from my boot. I went back to work on the drainage. Walt called down again about the grade on the upper turn, and I walked up to show him what I was seeing, and we talked through it in the practical way we always talked through problems, and I did not say anything about what I had seen. Not because I was afraid of what he would think, though I was aware of that consideration, mostly because I had not yet found words for it that would do it any service. We cleared the site as the light went out of the sky. Walt and the others packed out. I stayed a few minutes at the trailhead after their vehicles had gone, standing at the stump with Pepper beside me. I reached into my breast pocket and took out the flat stone and held it in my palm, feeling the smoothness of it that water makes over a long enough time. I thought about Deb peeling an orange on a cold October ridge, eating the sections slowly. I thought about the binder with the magazine photographs still on the shelf at home. I thought about how the thing in the timber had touched its hand to the bark of the spruce, not gripping, just touching. The grief that came up in me then was not the acute grief of the first weeks after she died, which had been a specific physical sensation, a weight on the sternum. This was something older, something that had settled in and become structural. And standing at that stump in the dark with the stone in my hand, I felt it shift slightly, the way something shifts when it has been held in one place too long, and something else finally makes contact with it from the outside. I am not going to say the encounter healed anything. That would be too large a claim, and it would not be honest. What I will say is that something in me had been locked up for a long time, and that evening it was less locked. I drove down the mountain to the campsite and started a small fire outside the tent and sat in my camp chair with Pepper across my feet. I had my phone with me, which I usually set to airplane mode on trail days, and I turned the airplane mode off. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I called Glenn. He picked up on the third ring. I heard the surprise in his silence before he said anything. "Cody," he said. "Yeah," I said, "it's me." There was a long pause. The fire made small sounds. "I should have called," I said. "I know that." He said, "Me too." And then he said, "How are you getting on?" "I'm okay," I said. "Getting better, I think." We did not make promises. We did not rehash anything. We talked for about 12 minutes, mostly about practical things, his place in Wheeler County, whether I was going to put a new engine in my truck or let the truck go. 12 minutes is not a reconciliation. It is a door opened a crack after 14 months of being shut, and that is what it was, and I will not inflate it. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap for a while, and Pepper lifted her head and looked at me and put it back down on my boot. The crew finished the 4-mile section over the next 2 days. The pre-cut switchback remained in the record as unexplained work, which is how it is recorded in Walt's notes to the district. Nobody could account for it. The district filed it as prior volunteer work, which is not accurate, but it is the closest category they had. I drove home on the Sunday afternoon. I unpacked my gear and I washed the clothes and I brought Pepper inside, which I had not been doing because Deb used to let her sleep on the bedroom rug, and then Deb was gone. And having Pepper on the bedroom rug was a thing I had not been ready for. That evening, I set up the rug and let Pepper in, and she curled up on it without any ceremony, as if it had always been her place, which it had. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in some months. I got out Deb's binder in November, about 3 weeks after I got home from the ridge. I sat at the kitchen table and I opened it, and I looked at the photographs she had clipped, and her notes in the margins, and I was able to do it. Not without some difficulty. But I was able to do it. There is a ridge in the North Cascades she had circled 3 times in red pen, with a note that said the light is different up there. I do not know what she meant by it exactly, but I think I understand the direction she was pointing. I called Glenn again in December. A longer call that time, 40 minutes. We made plans to see each other in the spring, nothing definitive. Just plans in the way you make them when you have remembered that making plans is a thing you are allowed to do. He came out in April and we spent 2 days putting new fence posts on the east side of my property, working in the good way that 2 people who have known each other a long time work, not needing to say much. When he left, he shook my hand and then hugged me briefly, the way men in our family do when they mean something they do not know how to say otherwise. Spring turned into summer, and summer tightened into a second October, and I put in for the same ridge section when the fall work calendar came out. Walt approved it without comment. I drove up to the trailhead on a Thursday morning, a year and a few weeks after the first time. Frost in the low spots, the same pale, early light. Pepper on the seat beside me, 9 years old now. Grey coming in around her muzzle, but still steady on her feet and still keen. I walked her to the trailhead stump and she went around it once, nose down, and then sat beside it and looked at me. The flat stone was there, still centered on the worn, flat top, sitting exactly as I had placed it back that second morning, exactly as I had left it the last day of the work assignment. A year on the stump in the weather, and it had not moved. I had not moved it. I had not been back to this trailhead between October and now, and nobody from the crew had any reason to come back to this particular spot. I took an orange from my pack. I set it beside the stone, close but not touching, the way you set something down next to something else that belongs there. Pepper sat beside the stump and looked towards the tree line. The morning was still. The first birds were starting up in the timber, nutcrackers and something smaller I could not place. And the ridge was going about its ordinary business the way ridges do when the weather is holding, and the season has turned and the work of the year is settling into the work of the next year. I reached out and rested my hand on the stone for a moment, just the warmth of my palm against the cool smoothness of it. And then I picked up my pack and started up the trail. Pepper stayed at the stump for a few seconds, looking toward the tree line. Then she turned and caught up with me and fell into place beside my left boot, where she always walks. I do not have a name for what was working that ridge. I have thought about it for a year and I do not have one that fits. I know what I saw. I know what was placed on that stump and what it cost to place it. Which is to say, I know that something carried an orange from a trailhead log to wherever it went, and left in its place a stone from a streambed, and centered that stone the way you center something when you want it to be found and understood as an exchange rather than an accident. That is what I know. The rest of it I am willing to leave where it sits. The stone is still on the stump. I have checked it twice since that October. Once in January when the snow had been and gone, and once in late March. Both times it was there, sitting where I left it, a flat, pale oval with a line of quartz running through it, at an angle. Not moved by weather, not moved by anything I can name. The trail got built. The erosion on the old four-line route is slowing, the drainage spreading the way it is supposed to spread when the grades are right. The ridge is doing what ridges do, and Pepper sits beside me at the stump every time I go back, patient the way she has always been, looking toward the timber with that forward-eared attention of hers that I have come to read as a kind of assurance. She has never been wrong about what deserves her calm. Some things in the world are larger than our accounting of them. I have been a practical man too long to say that easily. I say it now once, and I mean it in the plainest way I know. The orange I left that 2nd October was gone the next morning. I did not look for what it had become. I did not need to.